Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time of day it is. Thank you for tuning in to Conversations with Dr. Don. For your first-time viewers, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of one-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals, and about whatever it is we have decided to talk about. The first half of the show this evening is going to be a conversation between Pat Baham, my wife, and Haylee Levin, Pat's granddaughter, who are visiting us here from the Middle West, and they're going to spend a little more time with us. We're having a good time doing touristy stuff and all kinds of other things that we may talk about during the time we're visiting together before Jimmie Moglia will come on during the second half of the show, and we'll talk about political and social issues that I'm sure you're eager to hear us talk about. So we'll usually start off in this show talking about who we are personally, so the viewers will have an idea of who you are when you talk. Okay, I'll say a few words about me to model the kind of stuff I'm looking for. My name is Don Baham. I was born in New Orleans, Louisiana, and I went to college and postgraduate work and ended up with a PhD in clinical psychology. But I dropped out of junior high school, went back to school in later years, and I spent my time doing my talk show. I was a clinical psychologist and practicing in Southern California, and I love to be nice to people and to keep learning. I've been learning forever and ever. I was born in 1928, which means I'm ancient, so that's enough for that. So let's start off with Pat Baham. I've been talking to you and begging you to come on the show for years and years, and finally, when Haylee showed up, you decided to come.
I did. She's the only reason that I'm on the show.
Yeah.
So I'm happy that she's here, and she's been here since Monday. And I was born in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, America's Dairyland. And has lived in Chicago for 4 years, and then moved to California, to Los Angeles, California, where I met you. And
any regrets? No, don't answer that.
No regrets leaving Southern California. No, it's too crowded there, very crowded. And I like to play competitive bridge. I do that a couple times a week, maybe more. Have some good friends in the bridge world. Have met a lot of people, nice people. And like to exercise. I go to the gym a lot. Keep healthy. And I'm really happy that Haylee's here, because this is her first time here. She's never been to Oregon before.
Yeah. A little apology for the material on the screen earlier when we first opened the show. Kevin Levin was listed as a guest, but something happened and he's not available in the show as we thought he was going to be. So forgive that listing of his name in the beginning, and we're going to carry on from here on out. What are you doing?
Nothing.
And you are Haylee, and you corrected me on the spelling of your name. I spelled it Hayley, and you yelled at me.
I didn't yell.
What's your middle name?
Jean.
How come you got a middle name like that?
It's my mom's middle name and her mom, so it runs in the family.
Oh, and your daughter's going to have that same name too?
If I have kids.
Yeah. So, who are you? If I were to ask your best friend, who is Haylee Levin? What would your best friend say? Haylee Levin is what?
I would like people to say that I'm funny, but I don't really know.
A sense of humor. She has a good sense of humor.
Yeah. Okay, you make me laugh.
You like to play games, right? Board games?
I like to play soccer and running. I like to run. I don't like running, but yeah.
And what kind of other things do you do in your life that you will share with us? And don't answer for her.
I don't know. Not really that interesting, and I don't do a lot of stuff lately. I don't know.
Do you go to movies now and then?
Yeah, every now and then I'll go to movies, and
Who's your favorite actor or actress? Anybody come to mind?
No, not really. I like quite a few people. I don't know if I can put my finger on just one, but...
Sure. And you, what city were you born in?
Kansas City, Missouri.
Kansas City. You like it there?
Coming out here makes it look like crap, but yeah, it's nice to.
Cancel that question, because they're going to be seeing you back there, and in China and Afghanistan too. You'll be all over the world, Haylee. How does that make you feel?
Nervous.
You're going to be famous, yeah. And let's see, what else can I ask you? You want to ask me any questions?
I don't have anything.
You have any questions for Haylee, Pat?
No, I don't have any questions for her other than what I've already asked her.
Uh-huh.
I've asked her about her cross-country running. She's doing cross-country running, and I didn't know anything about that. And then she told me what that was.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to start the second year of cross-country?
No, I'm starting it this year, and it'll be my second year of soccer at school, and then I'm joining a club team for soccer this year too.
You know, this is kind of early to ask you this question, but what are you going to be when you grow up?
Something medical, probably.
Uh-huh, medical. And your biological mom is a pharmacist?
Mm-hmm.
Is she going to be glad to see you on television?
Yeah, I think we'll look back at it and probably laugh at how dumb I look.
Yeah. All right. Now, if you look right in that camera, you can tell her how you feel about her. Say, Mom, tell her.
Hi, Becky.
Yeah, so how about the weather? Do you like the weather here?
Yeah, it's a lot nicer.
Yeah.
It's not humid and nasty.
It's humid back there, huh? Okay, but it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So anything more we should talk about?
Well, I don't think you really think Kansas City is that descriptive word. I think you like Kansas City. You've lived there all your life, and I like it
I'd
there.
rather live there than deal with like traffic here and stuff. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
can't handle it.
Right. Yeah. You like visiting here. You like being in Kansas City, though, too, because that's your home.
Mm-hmm.
So I like going there. Kansas City is a lot like Portland, I think.
Portland's nicer.
Well, except for the weather. The weather is different, but the downtown area is the same, and a lot of fountains there. There are more fountains there than
Anywhere
else in the world, even more than Italy. So that's an interesting city.
I would talk to you some more, but I'm afraid you'll say something else about Kansas City, and they're going to ban this show and not show it in Kansas City. Not true, yeah. But I'm glad that you came aboard. Shall we stop now?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Oh, thank you.
Thank
so
you
much
for
coming
thanks for
in.
having us on.
Yeah. Any final message or words you want to say to my viewers? Say, hey, viewers, blah, blah, blah.
No, not really.
Thanks again.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you.
Take a little break in there, Mr. Control Room people.
Okay, that's good.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. For those of you who turned in late, I wanted to invite you to know what it is you're watching, Conversations with Dr. Don. And again, for your first-time viewers, Conversations with Dr. Don that you're watching is an ongoing series of one-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there and like Jimmie Moglia about what's going on in the world and what their passion and their interests are. So let's start off with a brief overview of your bio, who you are personally. You've done it 1,000 times, but I keep batting you back because you're so interesting.
1001.
So,
you know, people have seen so many times that I feel like as a broken record of the old type, not the broken CD.
So who is Jimmie Moglia?
I am originally from Italy.
Uh-huh.
By training, I'm an engineer, and I worked my life in make a living being an engineer.
Mm-hmm.
And then at one point, out of my one not alone crazy ideas, I became a writer, which would be a very pompous thing to admit to being one, because to do say so, you should have all these concurrent parallel qualifications. But I've written 3 books.
3 books?
3 books.
You give us the titles of them?
Yes. And they are long titles. They have titles and subtitles, because without the subtitles, the title would be misleading, or rather, it would not be very illustrative. One, again, I'm repeating here, is Your Daily Shakespeare, and the subtitle is An Arsenal of Verbal Weapons to Drive Your Friends into Action and Your Enemies into Despair.
An arsenal
of verbal weapons to drive your friends into action and your enemies into despair.
And I've got a copy, and I know what you're talking about. It drives my friends nuts.
And the reason why I wrote it, which is really it's really a reference book, but there was no reference book of this type available. So as Oscar Wilde used to say, when I want to read a good book, I write it, but that's an exaggeration.
No.
And however, the main point is that most people associate Shakespeare with plays on the screen, and those who on stage, and those who do not assume that Shakespeare is a very difficult text to absorb, to read, or to get fun of. So yes, there are parts in these 37 plays, or in the sonnet, or in the poem, which are not particularly, I would say, sexy or appealing. However, much of what is appealing is of actuality, can certainly be used, besides the well-known fact that much of very many expressions that are of current use in the English language come directly from Shakespeare. But apart from that fact, most of the quotations, or all the quotations, of course, are written in 1500 English language.
And you know them all?
I know by heart. Yes, I don't know them all, not know all, but a good part of them, because one of my intriguing pursuits of useless things was to devise a system whereby a person of average memory can memorize quotations of any author of any type, and this involves some software, which it would be too long to explain here. But however, I digress. I was going to finish the conversation, finish the introduction, rather, the answer to your question. Mm-hmm. The structure of the book is what makes it unique and, above all, useful. Unique would be not a good qualification, but usefulness, yes. Uh-huh. And that is, rather than listing the quotations by play, they are listed by situations. And so in the book there are, which is as thick as a good-sized Bible, yes. there are over 10,000 situations that one may find oneself in. So there's a situation, there are tips on how to use the particular quote that applies to that situation, and they're also very important, in my opinion at least, in the opinion of the readers too, is a description of the context in which the actual quotation appears in the play or the poem or the sonnet. So for those who are interested in finding the roots of that quotation and finding where it comes from, it brings them to attention why it was said and by whom, so they can have a better way of remembering and or memorizing, as I was saying. So that was the structure that led me to it, particularly also because in my previous when I was of course in before I went to work on my own for my company, I was employed by a large corporation as in a managerial position, and I was exposed to it sounds a little bit downgrading, but I was exposed to many very boring presentations, and so the intent of the book, although is for any person who is interested in literature or Shakespeare, is to provide an arsenal of verbal weapons to be used in presentations in various occasions that they may come, and so that's one of the.
So it's appreciated, huh?
I think so. In fact, it sounds like how to say, blowing our own horns is never very particularly appreciated, but I receive feedback quite constantly because I have a website in which I write articles once every week every 2 weeks. So people who buy the book through via the website comment also, and so they tell me they found it useful, and or their children have found it useful, their students have found it useful. So I would say that overall, statistically speaking, the objective of the work was achieved. In fact, and I will stop here because you talk about books. Out of the Shakespeare book came the equivalent work for Dante Divine's Comedy, but it's written in Italian. And so, in the work and the title of the Italian book for Dante is Our Daily Dante.
How many languages do you speak?
3,500. Let me finish.
Okay.
3,500 ways to get away with it with Dante, and the purpose is the same. And how it came about, because I'm absolutely unknown, but it came about that a senator, an Italian senator, who now is in government, who had come across the draft of the book, asked the person who gave him the draft to take the book with him to a congress where he was going, because I'm going to use it in my presentations. So out of that,
that was flattering.
Out of that came the for me was something to put in your whatever lapel, whatever. That the government of Tuscany decided to publish the book, and it came up last year, and they invited me to Florence with a nice presentation, so all the good things that normally I would never expect. So the third book, which is at the printer now, is not very large. It's about 160 pages, but it's a historical, psychological history of America.
Boy, I'm certainly interested in that, being a psychologist myself.
Well, the psychology can be is a grandiose word, but rather than just saying this happened in this way, this happened on this date, and who was who, and you cannot really do much in 160 pages. But overall, the intent is to explore the motives behind some of the historical decisions that were taken in various parts of the American history from 1770 to the present, and find a thread, a common thread, or as they say now, on connecting the dots.
That's ambitious. It's in the printer now?
It's in Italy, because they asked me to write in Italian, so it's for the Italian audience.
Is it going to be translated?
I don't think it's worth it, because most people here will already be aware of it, at least those who are interested in American history. Mm-hmm. But certainly in Europe, although there is quite a bit of knowledge about American history, there is certainly less, so I'm not pretending to have written anything new.
There's American history, and then it's your take on American history and your ideas and your reflection on American history that people would be curious about because of your earlier works and your peculiar personality anyhow.
Everybody has a peculiar personality.
Yeah.
Well, we will see. But anyway, at the moment, it's there. Mm-hmm. It should come out shortly. In fact, I'm waiting for it to come out so I can go.
Okay, let me know when it comes out so I can get a copy.
It has to be translated.
That's right, I forgot, yeah, okay. I have to hurriedly learn Italian, so I can, never mind.
That's okay.
So, what else? That takes up a lot of your time. How long did it take you to put together the Shakespeare book, the big one?
The Shakespeare book took me a long time. It took me about 15 years, but partly because as I said, the intent was not to make my mark as a Shakespearean scholar. I define myself as a Shakespearean Rhodes scholar, but spelled R-O-A-D-S.
So that's bad.
But for the book to be useful, the format was critical. And so it happened that I started with one way, and then when I found a different format, I changed it completely. And although I used the computer, it still had to be all reformatted. So most of the 15 years were dedicated to how create or structure a format, as well as the analytical index in such a way that it may be actually useful to the user and the reader. Yeah.
What a mind.
I don't know.
So nowadays, you're busy doing something else now since your third book is in the printer? What
Yes.
are you doing with your time now?
I am I'm doing miscellaneous useless things. I am because I've set up my website and I try to learn a little bit more, which is an immense sea of everything that concerns the structure of the internet and the sites and everything else. So I'm learning a new language. Well, some of the languages involved, but there's low uptake, and so I have to rewrite them my own way. So and for me, if I don't understand, one of my difficulties is that if I don't understand something, it's the word that describes it that makes it an obstacle for me. So I make a lexical research about why they use a particular word. It's useless now to go into details. And then I'm writing a Socratic dialogue on how to maintain the optimal weight. So.
God, you never stop. A Socratic dialogue on how to maintain the optimum weight.
Or recover the optimal weight, yes.
And how long have you been doing that?
For a while, again, because I had the material, and I don't even know whether this will be published. But there is so much material about quote-unquote health and weight and the things of that nature that that to add something else and wasn't, to me it was not, it's not particularly.
But a Socratic dialogue.
But however, the only difference is because Socrates or whatever, Plato, whoever decides who was who.
One of those dudes.
One of those dudes had a way of explaining things that makes it pleasurable to read, as opposed to eat vegetables or whatever, eat omega-3 or whatever you want to call them.
Yes.
So the material was there, and it started several years ago, but then I let it go. It started out of an idea that I had on how to make people to slow their food intake, because most people, you're thin and you're fit, but one of the problems, most people who have declared having a weight problem is not because they are quote unquote they have a weight problem, it's because they tend to eat fast. And if you make an observation in fast food places or restaurants, and if you make a proportion between people who may consider themselves overweight and the way they eat, you will find that those who may consider overweight eat much greater, faster rate of intake than the others.
Really now?
Yes.
Is there any hard data on that or research?
Yes.
Oh,
except that the research is written in academic lingo, which makes it very boring. So, so for saying something that would take 6 words, they use about 20, including polysyllabic words of little interest to anyone except themselves. So these are books that tend to be read among the academia among themselves, sometimes with conflicting information. But
does your head ever hurt considering all these kinds of things? I mean, making a Socratic dialogue about the kind of stuff we're talking about now.
No, don't. It's misleading. If I say Socratic dialogue, immediately comes to mind a philosopher deeply set into a Greek mode of thought, laden with difficult concepts and tough to absorb. Not at all. It's just to make it a little bit lighter. And I try to practice what I preach, or rather, practice what I preach to others. So if somebody writes something that makes it readable for me, I'm grateful to him or her, and so I try to a little bit do the same with what I write. So.
Do you have a couple of thoughts right now that you've put on paper with this new publication that you would tease my viewers with?
Yes, it all. I design. It will be long to explain because if you eat slowly, you would definitely lose weight, or rather gain your weight. But it's more complicated than that. You're a psychologist. You know how much psychology is important in determining our objectives and maintaining them.
Sure.
But I've designed a little design. The first design was mine, and I dropped it. But I designed an a device that enables to combine both the psychological quote-unquote motivation as well as the actual time measurement. And it is something which is not intrusive, and one can, if one develops this habit, it is proven that it can reduce the weight.
How can you downgrade or have such less consideration for the psychological reasons that people are getting fat with how and what they eat?
I'm sorry, say again?
I think it's really important, or more important than I think you believe it is, to consider the psychological reasons that a person is overweight rather than just how they eat.
No, you are absolutely right, and this is why I will not go into details, because if you start going into details,
I had to find something to fight with you about.
We would bore the viewers more than already have. But the point is that the psychological aspect is the formation of the habit. And as you know, to form a new habit is probably the most difficult thing for anyone, irrespective of whether they're thin, fat, or in between.
Sure.
So the idea is to give the potential users or the user an effective mean, or at least the most effective mean that one can think of in order to change his or her habit. This is extremely important, but in order to, there must be a motivation, and if the motivation includes the measurement, and this is what I'm doing.
You never rest, do you?
No, until whatever.
I have a new sign that I was going to wear today, but I forgot to bring it in. And it reads on block letters, think. When's the last time you felt caught up? End quote, caught up. When's the last time you felt caught up? You know what I mean by that?
Meaning you have concluded, meaning you've finished with what you were planning to do or whatever?
Well,
no, explain it.
Something like that, yeah. And I've gotten some nice questions and comments as a result of it. Like when I put my head on the pillow at night, where before I close my eyes, I think, am I caught up pretty much? Meaning, what else is working in the back of my mind that I've got to do tomorrow and the day after, and my planning for the future, and occupying my mind with things to think about, rather than simply experiencing nothing.
Oh, I see.
No,
that has not yet happened to me. No.
I know, because the nature of our culture, too, I don't think it's a natural thing for Homo sapiens to be always thinking and figuring out and plotting and planning. We're designed to experience being.
It's an observation that would lend itself to additional comments, because being and thinking, when being stops and starts being thinking. Yeah. But let's not go into this.
Okay.
I would suggest anyway.
Yeah. You know the reason I have you on the show repeatedly? You know the reasons I have you on the show?
I make a good substitute.
It isn't just because I can find other people to step in and
sorry,
because you're so darn interesting.
No. Let's strip the previous statement from any unwilled interpretation. What I meant to say is that there are many other people who come on your show. Your show is probably the most well-known show on cable channel. I don't know whether the management will agree, but that's my opinion.
If you were better looking, I'd kiss you.
That is something I have to have no idea. However, but there are many, as you say, every person is interesting. So if whatever reason, sometimes
some more than others.
It depends on how they come up. It's difficult sometimes to get, better than I do, is to get the personality to come out. So, but anyway.
When's the last time you produced your last cable access TV show?
Last month, because I have a new show which is called Historical Sketches, and I have already made now 6, and next week I'll record the 7, And I call them historical sketches because they're half an hour, and so in half an hour you cannot make the history of anything. However, I select subjects that in my opinion, are somewhat interesting and certainly not talked about in the media. So the last one that I made, there were two. One was the history of the Gypsies, which many people know little about, where they came from and how they developed and the vicissitudes they had to go through in their life. And the second one is the history of the historical sketch is the history of the king of the Empire of Central Asia under Tamerlane that very few people know about. But as you know, with the pivot to Asia, it may be of some interest because there was in the late Middle Ages or so, there was this particular important emperor Tamerlane, who made some beautiful architecture buildings in Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan. And so because my show I edit it myself, so I add quite a bit of pictures, and so there's a view of this architecture and what the history, how it came about, that it was so famous at one point in time, and then it dropped out all of a sudden, and why? But so this was the last one. And next week, the next episode will be something that people relatively few people know about, the city of Pisa, and because, for example,
where the Leaning Tower is.
Well, exactly. People say the Leaning Tower, but the Leaning Tower is part of a large architectural complex, one of which is, apart from the cathedral, is the baptistry, which is separated. And there are some people who have been there. Some of them know about it, but I was able to extract from a video inside the baptistry, because of the unusual constructions of the dome. One person can create a musical chord with 3 notes, and it remains in the air, and it is so eerie and so beautiful. So I would put it in the show, as among other things. So that was the next one. So yes, you asked me, it was last month. The next one, hopefully next week.
Gypsy, that is a negative term for a certain clan of people. How would you call the Gypsies?
Well, you put the finger on why I made the sketch. The Gypsies were, from what I was able to find with various sources, I'll go back a long time, even 2,000 years or so, and they were originally from India and Pakistan. And the reason why they are not being called Gypsies, there are two. They, for a moment, because of the somewhat unusual nature of the tribe and not having written record, they don't have a written language.
Yes.
So people call them as they saw fit. So the first one that called them in such a way was, believe it or not, was a monk on Mount Athos in Greece, and for some reason, because he got the name in Greece, in Greek language, and then through the usual unfathomable paths of time and vicissitude events in Paris, they call them the Egyptians. From the Egyptians comes Gypsies, and they never don't come from Egypt, and so that's how it came about, Egyptians, but it's nothing to do with Egypt.
I don't know.
So, but they came from India, and the original movement, what is today India and Pakistan, and the original motivation for the migration was an invitation by a Persian, an Iranian ruler, for the wedding. At least this is what the legend goes. And so he invited all these families, all this large group from India, to come there, and they stayed there for a while with the little trades, and then they migrated on.
What they call the Romas?
There are various roots of the Romas is one, but there are several others. The Romas are the one more well known, but there are roots. I don't remember by heart now their names. So there are 5 or 6.
So which parts of Europe are the Roma people or the Gypsies in residence now for the most part? Which countries?
Which caused the part of the confusion. For reasons that have to do with, too long to explain, anyway, they ended up quite a large contingent of them into the Balkan regions, which was under Rome, the Ottoman Empire. And again, and in the Balkan regions, they moved from place to place. But they ended up, the good part of them, in Romania, Transylvania, and Hungary. So it is natural to associate the term Roma with Romania because they are so close, but they have really little or nothing to do with Romanians.
What do you know about your own history going way back? What are you mixed with?
Myself?
Yeah, you have any gypsy blood in you or whatever?
Gypsy blood? Everything is possible. 100 years back, you know, they could get records. No, I'm from the northwest region. In time, I made my researches. I can only go back to about the 1600, 1550 or so.
That's a ways back. I can only go back about 100 years.
No. Well, it's only because of the nature of the name, and so my name is a derivation from Latin, my last name, which means marshy lands, and I was able to track back that in 1400 or something, where I said 1500, but a little bit sooner. At the time, it's useless to describe how the structure of the Europe was set up, but it was under an empire. So for somebody to develop some lands, they used an instrument, a legal instrument called the charter. So the particular emperor at the time gave a charter to some monks to develop lands near the river, which is the flatland of northern Italy, in the middle of Lombardy. And those lands were marshy. And so they established a convent, and they started working in the land. And the town that they built was called Marshy Lands, which is my last name. And from there, the next the next village to the Marshy Lands was called Gonzaga, which is probably you know because it's also from Gonzaga University and everything else. And it just so happened that probably this is where we have to go by hypothesis. The neighborliness of the two towns were such that very likely someone from the town of Moglia, which is from the Marshy Lands, became associated with one of the Gonzaga who were bigwigs in the town of Mantua. And with him, so he became some kind of superintendent or something. And from there, he at this point, this particular Gonzaga Duke, through the usual endless gyrations of heirs and matrimonies and wars and fights, ended up inheriting a dukedom west, about 150 miles west, which is where I come from. And so very likely, the best hypothesis is that the superintendent of this particular duke went along with him in this migration to the new dukedom. And so when he arrived there, he gave his name. Very likely, he says, the languages were different. The best hypothesis I have is, he said, what is your name? And so he may have replied, Marshy Lands, which is, I come from the Marshy Lands, so that's what he wrote down.
Well, now is, I think, a good time to drift over, since we're in that area of the world.
Yes.
And what's going on in the Middle East nowadays with so-called Iraq and Persia in general, and Syria and Iran and Israel.
There are so many experts on this matter that adding my expertise would be really not much. But however,
your opinions.
However, excuse me, to add my opinion would be redundant. But however, the interesting part is that there is if somebody wants to accept it, there is an interesting comparison between what happens now in Iraq. In fact, even I saw in a newspaper the title, "The Balkanization of Iraq,"
Yeah.
with what happened in the Balkans, which is historically relevant today, because in next month will be the 100th anniversary of World War I, which was a slaughter, if there was any. It was World War I was a slaughter, as well as World War II was a slaughter. World War III will also be a slaughter if there is one. But the
if there is, you have any doubt?
Nobody can say.
That's a challenge, of course.
But I would, from what I hear, I read of, or at least from the acts that the current U.S. administration and acolytes, and their friends behave, from the way they behave, it is, I think, reasonable to assume that some people would not mind if there were one. But this is only speculation. However, the what happened it is normally assumed in the history books that World War I was caused by the Germans and the Austrians who attacked the Serbians because a patriot, quote unquote, had assassinated, which he did, the Grand Duke of Austria. But the situation was extremely complex and had been brewing for a long time. And it is somewhat, the comparisons can be this, more or less. I'm not being very accurate because I can, to summarize all this in a few minutes, I don't know, it will be difficult. But there were several forces at play that caused the war, and to list them individually would be a lot long. But there was, of course, the gradual disintegration of the Turkish Empire, which with the Ottoman Empire, and the creation of a sense of nationalities in Europe. Most of the nations in Europe come from the 19th century, not before. So and of course the economic, the imperial interests at play, imperial interests of England, imperial interests of Germany, of Russia, of Austria, of France, and all these conditions coalesced in the Balkans, which then became a fireplace for the war to start. And in the Balkans, the similarity with the Balkans is that at the time Serbia as the Ottoman Empire disintegrated, inside the Balkans, which includes Greece, there were already several independent states. There was Greece, there was Serbia, there was Bulgaria, and Austria, of course, who kept quite a bit of land there. And so the Serbs had the idea of making a greater Serbia, and which happened after the war, what they called Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia means the south, so the south of the Slavs. Mm-hmm. And whereas Austria was still trying to hold on to their dual monarchy, the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Mm-hmm. So by this subdivision of Serbia into various enclaves, if you call them that way, it caused so much friction that it was and friction, and the other powers were also getting ready for a war anyway, that it only needed a match to start it. But it's not only normally it is believed, and it's easy to remember, that because they assassinated the Duke, Austria started the war.
What will be the event like the assassination of the Duke for World War I? What will be the event that will be the spark
for World War
for
III?
World War III? Is it going to start in the Middle East, in the same area of the world?
It's tough to say, because in the same the parallel that you can make, I would say this is probably Russia, and it is interesting. It is Russia because the feeling of animosity towards Russia by the West, led by the United States, now is completely incomprehensible, because it's a capitalist country, but it has to do with the Soviet Union, and so it has remained there, and it is, in a sense, similar to the situation that caused World War I, where the assassination of the Grand Duke. The Duke was one, but it was really not the one. The main reason was that in 1870, Germany had, in a war, very light war, Blitzkrieg, had occupied the east area of France, which is called Alsace-Lorraine. Doesn't matter.
Yes, yes.
And this area was had been in turn had been French for about 100 to 100 years, but they were under dominion of France. But it was German speaking. So technically, they had a right, the Germans, to occupy this land. Mm-hmm. But the French never forgot it, because, and even the people in Alsace-Lorraine, although all the names are still French, German, they still consider themselves more French than German. Why? Because there had been a French Revolution, which had, in France, had affected France, but not Germany. So France wanted this revenge to get back Alsace-Lorraine at any cost, and Germany was also aware of that. So that was one of the major reasons. The parallel with the World War III option is that, in the same way, the United States as a culture has never forgiven Russia for having had the Soviet Union, which, for all its bad things that have been said about it, was really the first attempt at a socialist society. Mm-hmm. So this has remained as an act and a time of friction.
Joe Stalin and those guys. But are talking about, is it going to be an assassination of Sharon or somebody else that would be like?
I think that Israel will be the Sarajevo, will be the Sarajevo of World War III. But if it happens, I hope it doesn't. Of course. Hope so, but the real Israel, I see that Sarajevo, World War III, but the Alsace-Lorraine or whatever will be the Russia Sea Strait.
What can we do to prevent World War III from happening?
Personally, nothing. I think the only half.
How about collectively? Personally, nothing. How about collectively?
A view which is worth probably less than the air used to express it, is that the political system now is so weighed in such a way that there is no more democracy. So, but it's easy to say it, everybody agrees with it, but how do you go about it? I see, in my view, the only way to overcome this is to have politicians elected by lottery, as they did in Greece. There'll be a lottery. You have a number of qualifications in order to be a politician, whatever. And you have various groups, and then you keep the lottery and find out this way. And then the politician or whatever will be in charge for whatever number of years. There will be some restrictions of what you can do afterwards, otherwise it would make no difference. And that would be a way of adding some democracy. Otherwise, no, there's no input to politicians.
I think there's been some recent history indicating there is a we that can do something and did do something about women's suffrage, about the Vietnam War.
Yeah, but that was before.
Martin Luther King and Gandhi and nonviolent resistance.
This is not
taking to the streets.
Yes, nonviolent resistance is good to think about, but it's really, these days, is really a little bit lost its steam, as you can see with the Occupy movement, partly because the
we've got to look beyond these days, Jimmie.
Okay. Oh, of course, I'm all for nonviolent resistance or resistance of any type. I'm just, since you asked my opinion, I gave you my opinion. Uh-huh. But I don't see it. I don't see any possible radical change unless there is a really radical change in the electoral system at the roots. Because otherwise, you know already that it's an oligarchy. An oligarchy sounds like a bad name, but it is built in the system, which is an oligarchy.
What is the alternative then? Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren?
Of course, they are good people, and they certainly more electable, present to be elected than others. But frankly, I do doubt that they would have the freer hand that we think they may have if they be elected.
Perhaps
because they are surrounded by these enormous forces.
Succeeding generations, these kinds of things.
Well, after I'm gone, everything can happen.
No, Jimmie, there's people who will depend on us behaving more responsibly and more lovingly. You know that.
Yes, but that at the moment runs counter to the prevailing mode of thought.
Again, back to the moment again. We've got to think in the longer
personally,
term.
Yes. of course, we all try to do that. And in fact, even today, before I came here, I got a call somewhere from Europe, said, would you like to join this as a Skype, a new group that is forming for nonviolent.
Another one.
So there is this interest, there is movement, nonviolent, and trying to do something and fight corruption, but we lack the tools, and the real tool is in the way how the electoral, so-called democratic electoral system works, which is rotten at the beginning.
What do you do about it?
As I said.
How do you change it?
Hopefully to find a system whereby the politicians in charge would be for a limited time and elected by lottery, by drawing. It's not new. The Greeks used to do it. So.
How do we get that system operating nowadays, today in America, for example?
I
know. I'm challenging you, Jimmy. You're fine, fertile mind.
No, because there are too many forces against it. The academia is against it.
What if they said that for civil rights in Vietnam and women's suffrage? There's too many forces against that.
Well, Vietnam was the moment in history where, as we well know, there was a convergence of two ideas. One was the civil rights movements. Three, there was an extraordinary character called Martin Luther King. Yeah. And three, there was the fact that young men and men would have to were drafted. So the whole thing got together. Give me three equal conditions and perhaps something would happen. But at the moment, I cannot think of one.
Okay. You know, the time has flown by again, and I wanted to talk a little bit about what's happening on the border between the U.S. and Mexico. We'll get a couple of minutes to that. What's happening with those children?
Yeah, again, this is we have a few minutes.
Sorry about
that. I make reference only if anyone is watching is interested to refer to my website, and where I've written an extended article where there are comments. The problem that, in my opinion, apart from the immediate problem that are of these children, the fact that you have thousands of children traveling on their own through a desert which is filled with drug lords and all sorts of merchants of death and everything else, is itself indicative of the situation that you have in Central America. But it's also indicative of a situation which the newspaper, the media, completely ignores, and which is the fact of the incredible population growth in Central America, but worldwide. People do not realize it, but every 4 days, the Earth population increases by 1 million. Every 4 days, there are 1 million more people. And it is impossible, even if we wanted to, it's impossible, even if we wanted to give any reasonable way of life to this increasing population. There is the possibility of provide education or provide all these things, but all the money goes and spent in war. I was just reading yesterday a reliable statistic from a reliable source that the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq altogether have cost the individual U.S. citizen $53,000. So if you can imagine this, $53,000 for every person, it would be possible to give all of them free education,
care,
and a job that will be of a social nature. For example, send them to Guatemala, whatever, to provide those help. That organization really can do when they want to, but there is not will to do it. So that I summarized very quickly with a pretty long article that I wrote on my website.
Son of a gun! It's just so enjoyable talking with you about anything. We can go on forever and ever and ever. And how are you going to vote in the next presidential election?
I'm sorry to say, but I probably wouldn't vote. No, because look. There will be no...
Write my name in, for God's sakes.
Yes, or any name of the crew if they want to participate. Yes, but the candidates that come up, you know, Obama may be as good as any, but look at what happened. So by the time a candidate is decided on, he has already his agenda put in chain, so he cannot do anything else more that he can. So that is my opinion.
We're going to have to stop.
Very well. I think.
A final word to the viewers. Look in that camera and tell them what you want to tell them that you think would they're worth considering when the show is over.
What, in which respect?
Whatever. What
Oh,
your final thought about anything?
Final thoughts are very final. I if they have 1 hour in which they are completely they cannot get asleep for whatever, suffer from insomnia, connect to my website www.yourdailyshakespeare.com.
Put it up on the screen, somebody in there.
And,
www.
And you will find that there is material there that will induce sleep in the most refractory of people affected with insomnia.
Okay, thank you so much. And now it's time for a few public service announcements. Mr. Director, let's tell the folks how to get my local broadcast schedule. Go to my website, donbaham.com, and click on Present Day Activities. And to watch my shows on the web, go to Don Baham YouTube, and click on a particular show. There's hundreds of shows. There are all kinds of characters. Some as interesting as Jimmie, almost anyhow. And next on the American Civil Liberties Union, civil liberties are almost totally in the tubes by now. So go to the ACLU and see about joining. We need you. Thank you. Next one, my shows can be broadcast by other stations in other parts of the country. Actually, ask your local public access station to go to pegmedia.org and follow the instructions there on how to do that. One more time, and we got to end corporate personhood. Our country's going down the tubes again, I like that, down the tubes. To end corporate personhood, go there and learn how we can learn to tell them that corporations are not persons and money is not speech. And remember, thanks for watching. Remember KFC. Not Kentucky Fried Chicken, Dr. Don's KFC. Kind, friendly, and charitable. Be kind, be friendly, and be charitable to you too. And you too, Jimmie. And you too. Thanks again for watching. Bye-bye.